Hi everyone. I hope everyone hears me well and that everything has started correctly. Welcome to another Memgraph community call. I see people are slowly starting to join, so I'll do a small intro and you'll get a chance to join. Others will get the chance to join as well. I see people are saying hi in the chat, so hello to everyone. Write down where are you joining from. I'm currently in Croatia as well as my colleague Ante. So greetings to all. So today, as I said, I have my colleague Ante with me. Ante is a developer experience engineer at Memgraph, and he will do a presentation on Agentic GraphRAG, and he will also showcase a demo he has been working on. We were kind of working a lot recently on the topics of GraphRAG and AI, and maybe you saw these discussions in the previous community calls from us and others who worked on it. But yeah, the next step, I guess the next logical step was for us to kind of explore agents and agentic GraphRAG more. And that's why we decided to do this demo and presentation because it was our way of learning things. And now Ante is going to share his learnings with us. So before Ante starts, I see you know where the chat is. So please do the chatting there during the whole call. And also, if you have a question, feel free to ask there, or maybe even better, keep it in the Q&A section where you can ask a question and then I can highlight it after the presentation. We will do like a short Q&A session. And there will be a couple of polls also posted in the poll section, so make sure to check that as well. I think that's it. I will now stop talking and give the stage to Ante. Ante, welcome and good luck with your presentation.
Thanks, Katerina. Yeah, as Katerina did the intro, I will skip that part. Essentially, today I will talk about Agentic GraphRAG. I guess you all know what is happening in data world around GraphRAG and in general about RAG systems. And now the AI things just complicated all that story. So I hope that today, after the presentation, you have a bit more sense of how I personally and how we view some things on topic of the GraphRAG and especially with the agents. So if you have noticed, we just released Memgraph 3.0. We have a vector search enabled in the new version of Memgraph. We have high availability moved to the production ready. We improved the high availability a lot. We squashed a lot of bugs and we're very proud of it. And we started improving support for dynamic algorithms. So essentially by leveraging dynamic algorithms, high availability and vector search, you can build production ready AI applications. Each of these components was the reason why we decided to bump up the major version of Memgraph. I obviously today use the Memgraph 3.0, and for the rest of the things that we're going to talk to today are the GraphRAG, the agent, the Memgraph Agentic GraphRAG, and the demo. My goal is to kind of clarify this and how we view things, as I said. So GraphRAG is obviously a hot topic these days, but it has some downsides that I will kind of comment on. It mainly comes to being rigid and not being flexible. So this is why we kind of considered making it agentic, but I'll get to that point. For all of you that didn't have a chance to use the RAG systems a lot, I will do just a short intro here. So essentially, one of the building blocks is the LLM. And I guess all of you know here what the LLM is. It essentially takes some text prompt and generates something that we want. That's always the case. So we usually want LLM to generate something useful. That means that we typically want to focus on that prompt. We want to have the best. We want to have the best output based on the prompt. And it is important to know that like the LLM doesn't reason in a sense; it's just text predictor. But that's a very controversial topic. We can probably talk a lot about that. The goal is like you want to have some answers to the questions you have. So, for example, like what patient has some symptoms, for example, as you can see, and you can say, okay, I'll pull all the medical records and just give it to LLM and decide like it will decide what the treatment should be or something like that. The problem is we have limited context windows and we have a limited attention span, and that can lead to a little bit poor results. So we need to smartly think about what are we actually going to provide into that prompt. We cannot just say you should just take everything and kind of make some decision. One of the options is the fine tuning. You obviously know the big companies that have unlimited budgets are doing this, and they're essentially taking the knowledge they have from the internet and from the folks and trying to improve those models. Now, for the companies that are building search, this could maybe not be so feasible because you need to have expensive big machinery to do it. You need to have a bunch of GPUs to train it, and you need to have a bunch of GPUs to actually run it. Once the network is learned something, it's pretty fixed, but it's quite accurate and it can be quite good for a lot of stuff, especially if you have a good data. But as I said, it's quite expensive to do it. RAG came along and it provided the new way of doing things. So essentially, it provided folks to find the relevant information, provide that into the context, and then prompt the LLM with that exact context. And the goal is, as I said, having personalized answers on your questions and improving the prompt to get the better answer from the LLM. This is much easier to set up. It's typically more faster, it's more flexible, it is more scalable, and it's dynamic. Of course, the disadvantage is that the precision is probably not so good if you train something on a network by yourself. But as I said, it's resource intensive, so a lot of companies are not able to do it. So this was a short RAG intro. Now the GraphRAG is a similar thing, but it's based on the knowledge graphs. One of the key features of that is that you have a knowledge graph under the hood that is feeding the data to the LLM. Initially, it was developed by Microsoft, so there was a paper about Microsoft GraphRAG, and it was like the source that spawned a lot of ideas. But it is critical to mention that this is not the only approach that you can do with your GraphRAG. You can do it with different approaches. I will mention some of them, and we shouldn't like box ourselves into thinking that it's based on loading some structured data like documents into the knowledge graph and then trying to extract the knowledge. Because typically, if you do something like instruction ingestion, you'll get poor data, not clean data, and that can be problematic. So initially developed by Microsoft, but there are other approaches that you can leverage. Obviously, Memgraph is a graph database, so GraphRAG as a concept is very important to Memgraph, and we want to provide a lot of support to our users and customers using GraphRAG. So when we talk about the Memgraph GraphRAG, the key here is you have questions, that question has some context that needs to be fed, and you assume that you have some kind of knowledge graph already built, you have your private data in your companies, and you want to leverage Memgraph to perform a GraphRAG. You have to consider like two things. One could be like a pivot search and relevance expansion, and that's like finding the exact spot of the data that is interesting to you and then doing some expansion based on that point. After you have found that relevant data, you took it and provided it to the actual LLM and try to answer that question. So the pivot search and relevance expansion are actually just tools that you can leverage. So if you think about it, the pivot search could be like a keyword search, a text search, a geo search, a vector search, like a Loovian algorithm, Leiden, community detection, page rank, whatever, graph traversals. So it can be anything you want. And that Memgraph supports from the tooling, of course. And once you leverage the tools, then you can try to answer that question. Now, the example of vector search plus graph traversal is something that is one of the tools. For example, you embed some data. It can be embeddings of the nodes and properties, or it can be embeddings of the triplets. And then you say, okay, I want to perform a vector search on top of my nodes and find some similar nodes. And after I find the most similar node, or the nodes that are kind of the most similar, I can do some relevance expansion. And you can kind of do it by using the BFS, DFS, or any type of algorithm. And the example would be, okay, I'm searching for some patient mark, and then you find it, and then you say, okay, I want to hop from mark to some symptoms, or I want to hop one hop away or two hops away, and that's that vector search rules plus graph retrieval to get that actual data. Actually, the structured question that we're going to ask later in the demo is essentially vector search rules plus graph retrieval, and this is the Microsoft GraphRAG, for example. They use vector search on top of embeddings of the documents on communities, and then perform communities there. But it's a bit different. But as I said, the GraphRAG is not limited to just one approach. It's essentially having multiple approaches to solving the problem. Now, when we talk about multiple approaches, somehow you need to make decisions on what tool and what approach you should use. As you can see, Memgraph has multiple features and tools, and somebody has to make that decision. If you hardcode like the vector plus relevance expansion as a one pipeline, you basically limit yourself to just that part of the retrieval. Now, this is where the agent comes in, and this is where the kind of focus loses a bit, because of what is an agent and how it operates. I like to think about very simple concepts and not going into theoretical details. But this slide is a bunch of text that says that agent is a system component that interacts with large language model. But if you kind of look down and read this TLDR, it's an LLM call with a specific prompt and contextual information that makes some decision. It can have multiple steps. So essentially, the agent is the exact same thing as an LLM call. It shouldn't be more complicated than that. Usually, there are multiple steps that can happen there, but the important part is that agent receives some input, it takes some decision on that action, and then interacts, for example, with an external knowledge source and produces some response. So he is basically making a decision based on some data source, similar to the GraphRAG thing. Let's look at the example. Let's say we have a question classification agent. This is the same part that we'll have in demo. So you ask a question, and then you ask the agent to classify that question into the following types, because not all the questions are the same. So, for example, you can have a retrieval question that's some kind of direct lookup where you look for a specific entity, or you can have a structured lookup where you kind of are looking about how the things are related in the graph. Or you can have like a global query that kind of follows the trends and is looking like where is the data set going, what is happening with the communities, or what are the most important nodes, for example. Or you can have like a query about the database, like how is Memgraph configured at the moment, whatever. And then how old is a person named John? Okay, that's a retrieval question. That's the type of the question that LLM made the decision. And we, based on that data, we are doing some next steps there. And what is important to know, so for example, the types of question you can ask can be also dynamic, and it can be pulled from the database. Here's another example. Does Memgraph has show schema info enabled? So essentially, you can enable show schema info to get fast-paced queries about schema. The agent response in this case is a database query. Now, based on that question or based on that response, you can make some decisions in your application. An agentic application is a step up from that. It's essentially, if you again read just TLDR, it's a multiple chain LLM calls, where each call is trying to accomplish some small task, and they share the context and the knowledge in between. And if you think about it a little bit, it's essentially a state machine. It's nothing too fancy, but just multiple LLM calls that are sharing the same context. And they're working together to get to the actual solution to the problem. The only difference is that they are making that plan and kind of trying to autonomously get to some point. There's no human intervention. Of course, during the process, they retrieve the data and they iterate or have feedback loops, but there are a bunch of LLM calls chained together to achieve some common goal, and they share how they got to a specific point to understand how to fix itself. So if you think about it, about the concept of a state machine, and in terms of a GraphRAG, you have some question. You could have some context around that question. You provide to that question to the first agent, and the agent makes a decision. So he pulls some data, like what type of questions are there. And then he said, okay, I have made a decision. That question is something. And then it passes that to the next agent who says, okay, I know how to run a page rank, and I can know how to configure it. And then I will try to run that page rank. And based on the results, he made some decision, provides context further, and then the another agent, it's also an LLM call, does something else, and then you pass that further. So how are you controlling this? You're essentially letting your agents make decisions. You're not controlling the whole process. You're just kind of creating the guidelines around what can happen and what cannot happen. Of course, we are not talking here about the agents in psychology where they have like a free will. We are talking more about they are making a decision. We are not forcing the decision on them. And yeah, they're usually achieved by using the structured outputs and functions calling. So for all of you who haven't had a chance to use the OpenAI or API or LangChain and Llama index, it's basically saying an LLM to return JSON format or call some specific function that you have. So essentially, LLM won't return you some kind of random gibberish text. It will just return that specific thing you want and in specific types. And the important thing is there are some feedback loops because as a human, you also have like that feedback, but I'll talk a bit about it a bit later. So why are we talking about this from the Memgraph perspective? We are talking because Memgraph has a bunch of tools to perform a GraphRAG, and you want your GraphRAG to pick the right tool for the right question. That's essentially the thing. So if I ask you, or if you have like a question about how can I get the information does Memgraph uses log level trace, you will go to documentation, you will search for it, etc. The same way the agent should operate. So you ask a question like, does Memgraph has that configuration type? And he should know what tool to pick to get to that information. And that's basically why we are talking about Agentic GraphRAG, because we want Agentic GraphRAG to apply also to data you have. So applying the right search and applying the right tool to the question you have. And now we are starting to talk about essentially the demo. So not all GraphRAG tools respond to all questions. As I just said, if you have a question about configuration, if you have a question about data, that question about the data can be very different. You can maybe ask something about location or whatever. And question essentially defines the tool that you want to use. But you don't know what tool you will use because you don't know what question you will get. So essentially, you need to let the agent make the decision. Tool is modeled by the agent automatically, and tool responses are being validated. And that's how you can decide, is my answer good or not? So essentially, you start with some question. The question classification agent says, okay, that's the question type. Then tool selector agent says, okay, if that's the question type, you have these 10 options, or 3 or 2. And then you select some tool and start with that. And then retrieval agents is trying to respond to that question before using that tool. So he's adapting the tool to the actual question. And then after the tool has been executed, you take some data, you decide is it relevant or not. And if it is, you kind of say, I have the relevant data, I have provided the right context, you should respond to the user, and the agent responds to the user. So the only interaction here as a human is kind of building this state machine and providing the question, and everything else happens automatically. Here's the example of that classification agent that I mentioned. As I said, we are using in the demo structured outputs from the OpenAI. You define the class that you want to get, and then he will give you the exact types you need. And here is the actual prompt, the similar prompt that we use in the code. And he's making a choice of what type of question did we ask. And for example, if the question was about most influential nodes, then you pick the tools. You pick the tool, for example, PageRank. Now that agent that manages the PageRank can also say, okay, I will take a look at the question and I will decide how many nodes do I need to provide. If the question is what is the most important node, you will return one node. If the question is what is the 10 most important nodes, he will provide 10 nodes. If the question is not specifically defined, is the Coca-Cola in the most influential nodes, it will make a decision on how many nodes he actually wants to provide. So here, it's an LLM call that eventually made some choice, and based on that choice, you're adapting your tool to that particular output. So when we talk about the demo essentially is publicly available. It should be a dataset agnostic. As every demo, it's not being built to be battle tested. It's more of a showcase how you can do it yourself and provide some examples. And after the presentation, you have the link so you can kind of check it out and comment on it. Essentially, what this demo does is it operates fully autonomously. It's based on the question type and runs a specific tool that it finds fit for that question. Then it retrieves that data from the Memgraph via the tool that was provided. And based on that data, it makes a decision and reiterates if it finds that the tool has successfully been executed. And it's trying to provide the best answer to the question as possible. Now we all know that it's hard to cover all the cases. So essentially, as a demo, I have built just a few types of questions and answers to showcase how this agentic state machine operates autonomously and chooses how to pick the best tool. So from the Memgraph 3.0, we essentially use the vector search, we use the text to cipher, we use schema info, we use community detection, PageRank, BFS, DFS, and a few other things. But essentially, the demo does not use frameworks. So we are not using a LangChain and Llama index. Why is that the case? Because we wanted to iterate fast, and we wanted to get to the gritty, nitty details of things. What is essentially an agent here? What is agentic application? Like how are things operating? Because sometimes it is hard to see those details if you are using something that is a few levels higher in the instructions. So we essentially go get and build that by using the OpenAI API. So now I'll show you the demo. Before that, big shout out to Robert from the S News who provided us this dataset. Although the demo is dataset agnostic, and we will continue reiterate with different data sets. Thanks to Robert for providing it for this particular case. So now I will shortly jump to the demo and start with some questions. So, for example, one of the questions can be, what can you tell me about this data set? Now, if you think about it, this is quite general question. And as it is a general question, you can use different tools to actually answer it. You don't need to actually go and perform something complex. You can actually look at the schema, for example, and see what this data set about, what this data set is about. And for example, the classification agent said this is a database question, and then the tool that can be used is schema tool, and it's correctly find the right tool to use it, and then it says what this data set deals about and what are kind of the statistics of this data set. So essentially, from the point me asking the question to the actual answer, I just ask the question and the tools will select it automatically. This also means that if something goes wrong, it's not up to me, it's up to the agents trying to answer this. So yeah, the next question. Let's go this way. What can you tell me about Coca-Cola? So first, we are classifying the question type. As again, the question is quite generic, but this type, it's a retrieval type of question. The reason why it is retrieval, because we can specify the exact entity that we want to get. And it says that available tools are Cypher and vector relevance expansion, the example that I can show in the slide. And the tool was executed completely, successfully, and then we got the response, and Coca-Cola is a company that falls under the category of consumer goods company. So essentially, we got the good response again, and this time we used text to cipher to get to that particular solution. Okay, let's ask something more complicated. How is Coca-Cola connected in the graph? What is other companies? Whatever. So this time it's a structure type of question. Again, it's like a cipher and vector elements tool. Now it's performing one of those tools, and we will probably get some results. So essentially, as you can see now, without going into the details of the actual results, the question defines the tool is being selected automatically, and we are getting some response. So essentially, based on the provided data, Coca-Cola is connected in the graph to the top gainers, to Dow Jones Industrial Average. So essentially, Coca-Cola has some connections of gains with the Dow Industrial Average, which highlights the performance some of the bands within the companies. The interesting thing here is that we are not picking the tool. The LLM is essentially picking the tool. So let's see another one. What level of logging does Memgraph has enabled? As you can see, it doesn't have anything to do with the data set. Let's see if it goes right. Okay, it's a database type of question. It's a config tool that we can use. So we get the config data back. This is the Memgraph configuration from the things you configured while running the Memgraph. And we got a response. Memgraph has a logging level set to trace as indicated by configuring parameter log level. Okay, let's try to run that page rank that I was discussing on the presentation. So, for example, the question is the Coca-Cola in the most important nodes? Like, how many nodes? What are the most important nodes? We don't know. So we just ask the question, and LLM will kind of choose how to interpret this. So essentially, this is like global type of question where you are considering a global graph, and then the tool selected is the PageRank or community, and PageRank was successful, and we got a few nodes. Looks like 10 maybe. And based on the provided data, Coca-Cola is not listed among the most important nodes. Why? Because LLM took the choice and said, okay, let's say that 10 nodes are the most important, depending on how many nodes is actually here. So I didn't actually configure the number of nodes here. But if I say like, is the Coca-Cola in the most 1,000 important nodes? Let's see this time is it going to work. So again, global question, tools are PageRank, community. And yes, Coca-Cola is among 1,000 most important nodes. It's listed as a beverage company with a rank of something, right? So we essentially got 1,000 nodes back because the LLM adapted the query, GraphRAG query, to the actual content of the question. We didn't pass the parameter, but rather we asked the LLM to decide how many nodes is actually considered the most important, or is there anything that suggests that what is the category limit for that, for example. Okay, that's pretty much it. If you are going to have any questions, we can also ask the GraphRAG, let's ask something random to see if it's going to fail. What is connection between Chinese stock market and US? I don't know what would happen. So it's a structure type of question, which is good. We are asking about the structure. The possible tools are Cypher or vector relevance expansion in this case. And we'll see what we're going to get, if we are going to get anything. But the point here is you see the Cypher has failed. So the relevance expansion was successful. We actually got the data back. Now it's generating the final response. Okay, so obviously the Federal Reserve is an important entity, and yeah, we got some results. I'm not sure how true that this result is, but it's mentioning interest rate adjustments having impact in both US and Chinese stocks. So it looks like something that is a solid answer. But what is important here to note, we asked some general question. The structure tool was used. The one tool has failed. Cypher was not able to generate that. But then we go back to the second tool, and the tool actually succeeded. And based on the data that we got back, we essentially got some answer to our GraphRAG query. Yeah, so what is important here? Important is that you need to have that feedback loops to be able to handle that cases when the things go wrong. This is an interesting example that I screenshotted so that we don't need to repeat it here. It's the question is, what can you tell me about the Coca-Cola? Essentially, the same thing happened in the background now. It's a retrieval type of question, and Cypher is trying to match that Coca-Cola entity. So if you take a look, entity organization ID Coca-Cola, and is trying to match that entity based on the schema. But the problem is the query did not return any results. The query actually was okay. Memgraph was able to execute the query, but there wasn't any data. So the problem here is in the uppercase or lowercase letters. So when the human type and ask questions, they don't care about case sensitivity. So it is important to build in some type of retry mechanism for LLM to be able to kind of try to figure out what is the problem. So in the actual code, you can kind of say, like I said here, there is a possible issue with the query labels and parameters. If you're matching strings, consider matching them in the case insensitive way. So the agent is kind of with the prompts trying to figure out a way to get better and recover itself and try to answer that. And if you take a look at this particular example, it got right. So based on the correct query, it was able to get that Coca-Cola entity back. So in general, the feedback loops are important and they can be implemented for any tool that you have. PageRank, for example, also. So we built this to learn, to share that knowledge, and we'll continue to build and share knowledge with you. And when we kind of finished, we were thinking about possible improvements. So it would be good to have like geo tools, text, dynamic calculs all built, and that all that we have full automatic tool selection. So now I have limited tool selection based on type of the question, but having like a full list of tools and then just asking the question and then just finding the right tool that is being specifically managed by a specific agent for that particular tool would be super cool. And essentially, you will build a universal Memgraph knowledge retrieval agent that can retrieve knowledge from any graph, for example. One of the things that we already have is a graph chat, for example. And the graph chat is essentially text-to-cipher agent. It was built to support your queries in English, and then it's trying to generate the cipher equivalent of that English question. And it's doing quite fine, but if you ask it like what are the most important nodes, it may kind of generate the page rank, or it may not. You are not sure, but the point is, it's just one of the tools that you can use to build Agentic GraphRAG. It's not just about the text to cipher, or it's just one of the possible tools. So everything we learn will probably build into GraphChat to be more generic, so not to use just text to cipher. And yeah, so this pretty much sums up what I wanted to say. Before we move to Q&A, I just wanted to say that you had a chance to listen to Memgraph Agentic GraphRAG today. February 18, we have GraphRAG Global Search Hierarchical Modeling. Then after that, we have Intro to Memgraph Lab 2.0 and Demo, which the graph chat will be one of the topics and how we improved it. And actually, the graph chat is getting to be a very good agent for cipher generation. And then we'll talk about Memgraph, NIPSIC, and the Retrieval-Augmented Generation from FI Consulting. And I did mention the GraphRAG is from Redfield on the global search with hierarchical modeling. Yeah, now I will move to Q&A if there are any questions.
Thank you, Ante. Just a sec, let me fix this us a bit. Okay. Yeah, we have questions. We had a lot of questions and a lot of conversation in the chat, but let me start highlighting some of those. So I shared the demo code. There were questions about that, but maybe to add to that question, so Sai asked, if you are not using LangChain or Llama Index, how do you know which tool is being called? I know you commented on this one, maybe one more time to explain this to everyone.
So one of the reasons why we didn't use LangChain and Llama Index, they're great frameworks, but they essentially created these abstractions on top of LLM calls. And then you're not sure like what logic is being implemented in LangChain and Llama Index, and you're not sure like how all these things operate and work together. By using directly the API, in this concrete example, we used the OpenAI API, we were able to control the whole process, and we were able to use the structured outputs. I experimented with the function calling, but I didn't use it because it's much easier to prototype with structured outputs. To build it from the ground, and yeah, it's maybe not so reusable for the folks who use Llama Index and LangChain because it doesn't have direct examples, but it's provided a good knowledge base. So yeah, if you are not using LangChain or Llama Index, the OpenAI, or I think pretty much any API from these LLM cloud providers can give you the structured outputs, for example, and you get JSON back and you can do it whatever you want.
So you basically use that for this
Yeah,
tool selection
exactly.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, then let's go next. We have a question. When you mentioned that issues on GraphRAG are that they are a bit more static compared to the other RAG solutions, then Felipe asked, did we explore or have suggestions on ways of making it easy to overcome that? So like what kind of solutions patterns would be to regenerate graph structures? What is our approach for that? Because from his conversation with friends, blocker for adoption was, what if my graph is wrong and I want to do big changes on it? So what if the graph changes? How do we handle that in Memgraph, and what would we kind of suggest in that case?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not super sure that I understand the correction the question correctly, but I will try to provide the answer. So when I said static, I meant the pipeline in your GraphRAG is probably static. So essentially, you decided to answer all the question with a particular pipeline where you say, okay, I will use embeddings. I will find the relevant part of the graph, and I will perform relevance expansion from that. And but what if you used some synonym, for example, for the same thing, and then the embeddings kind of failed, and maybe the text search would catch something similar. So you're not sure what tools will answer you to your question, and that's why what I meant by the static. When we talk about the actual graph structures, if Philippe has thought on that, the problem with the graph structures is, yeah, they're dynamic, and it's hard to track the schema and adapt the queries and pipelines to the changing graph schematics. But this is essentially where the text to cipher really shines, because no matter the schema, it essentially recognizes the changes and adapts the queries directly. That's one of the benefits. But this is also a point where the cipher is not being generated correctly.
Thank you, Ante. And when talking about Cypher, we have a couple of questions regarding that. So Sai also asked, but I saw that in one of the following slides, is it possible to see the Cypher query that is generated? So during this process, do you have that control of when agent selects the tool and you have some Cypher that is generated in the background? Can you kind of see what's actually being run in the background?
Yeah, so you're providing a prompt to an LLM. You can call it just an LLM call, or you can call it an agent, whatever kind of suits you. You're providing a prompt to the LLM, and you're asking to generate the cipher, and then you get that structured output in form of a query. So you can immediately see what query did you get. But at that point, you can do a validation of that query by trying to run it on Memgraph. Then if you got some results, you are considering, is it good results? That's the feedback loop that I was mentioning, or thinking about, if I didn't get any results, but I'm kind of confident that there should be some results, maybe something is being wrongly generated. And then you need to think like how the person would essentially write the wrong query, and how you can help an LLM to figure it out, and it will work in some cases. Of course, cipher generation won't work in all the cases, and one of the things in Memgraph that we'll work on in the future months is improving the error messages from the wrong cipher queries, because they provide valuable context back to those LLMs or agents trying to write that. An example here is the Rust programming language, for example. They have a great error messages for a user that uses the programming language. It would be cool if the cipher typing type of errors.
Thank you, Ante. And regarding Cypher, so can you maybe explain the difference? Because I saw the question here. What is meant, for instance, the Cypher tool that was used in the demo? So can you maybe give us an explanation of when you talk about text to Cypher, or like a Cypher tool versus a Cypher query that is generated by other tools that you have in the in your pipeline?
Yeah. So essentially, when we said Cipher tool, that's essentially the text to Cipher generation. And that's essentially what the lab does. As I said, it's just one tool that you can leverage to try to answer the question. And yeah, as we showed in the demo, we asked some question, and the cipher generation was unsuccessful, even after like four, or I think the default is 4 retries. It didn't manage to recover itself, even though Memgraph probably provided the exception, like we don't support that function, or I didn't look now into the details of the logs. But then it decided to use another tool because this tool wasn't unsuccessful. So yeah, that was referring to the same thing.
Okay, I hope that answers this question. We have another question. Are graphs created using LLMs? If so, what is the cheapest way to create an accurate graphs?
If graphs are created using LLMs, if so, it's definitely some kind of a not online model from the APIs, because typically they're quite expensive. So if you can host your own smaller models, they can do quite good knowledge extraction. So I think like Spacey and has some like libraries to help with that. So essentially, not using the cloud provider API to do it would be much cheaper if you can run Llama locally or something like that.
Yeah, and as Robert just commented, so the graph that was used in today's demo is the Ask News dataset he provided, and he just shared the model he used in the chat, so
Yeah.
5.3 mini. So yeah, of course you can use a model to do that. The point of this demo was more to focus on the different retrieval strategies and creating agents and Agentic GraphRAG. But definitely knowledge graph creation. And we had some questions about data modeling. It's a topic for itself. I think this is saying that we should do that one as well, a bit of additional research on that side, and then do another call on that topic, as it's quite, I would say, quite hot topic. We have one more question from Ali. He said he still doesn't see what's the use case here. So what are the actual benefits of even having a GraphRAG, or like maybe you can compare having Agentic GraphRAG?
Yeah, so if you think about search in your company, I'm not sure where Ali works, but if you work in some company, mid-sized company that has a lot of internal data, and you want to figure out some things in data or ask about data, and you are not sure what is the best approach to get to that data. Now, you don't need to think about how to get that data if you have autonomous GraphRAG system that decides that for you and is trying to do the best thing it can to find that data that you need. So essentially, the engineers can build a GraphRAG pipeline that is fixed, and that fixed pipeline will work in some questions. If you have like a autonomous GraphRAG pipeline that's being driven by agentic LLMs, for example, it could maybe work in cases that have like multiple question types and be more adaptive to that question. So when we talk about the exact benefits, we cannot pinpoint and say, oh, like this is the benefit one, because it's very early days for GraphRAG in general, and also for agentic GraphRAG. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a quite good answer. I hope that helps, Ali. And we had another one that's maybe, I mean, it's more related to the thing that I was mentioning sooner previously. I think, what about automatic entity identification for technical documents? Maybe this is more, again, referring, I'm not sure, I would say it's maybe more referring to the named entity recognition process and maybe building a graph. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think that, for example, the one of the shoutouts that we did for the Ask News for Robert, so he's essentially building a lot of these dynamic data sets from the news. And I think this is a very hard task, especially entity resolution, where you are trying to match the data that you already have in the database to some entity that is being driven from the LLM. And in general, I think that as we are generating unstructured data with LLMs, we'll get semi-good data into the database, which is somewhat expected. But we should also treat it that way, and we should be like suspicious of, is that something that's relevant, or how, like we should be suspicious, is that data correct? Now, what is valuable here is that essentially, and for example, in that S News case, is if you have really fresh data, you can kind of quickly scrape it and load it, and you can maybe make some fast decisions based on the newest events. So there is a benefit of not having everything structured and not having everything nicely polished, because this takes time. But if you have something that you need to do quite fast in the timely manner, you can just ingest everything how it is in whatever format it is, and then try to make some decisions.
Yeah, definitely a big topic to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. That's a limited topic to talk about.
Yeah, unlimited. Okay, so we have another question. How does it perform, I guess, your Agentic GraphRAG when you ask analytics questions, such as how many companies there are? So questions about averages also, or fuzzy questions, like what happened last week?
Okay, so that's a good question. This GraphRAG, Agentic GraphRAG that we just showcased, is limited to a set of tools that were provided. And essentially, if I ask how many companies there are, there will be probably two approaches there. For example, it could generate a cipher and try to match and count the companies. It could go to the schema info, because schema has the number of nodes that has a company label on it, for example. So that's how it will answer about companies. Now, how would it answer about last week? And that's a good question, because it's a general concept of time in the data set. And I'm not sure like what tool would be used here. But it will be interesting to see, like we have these temporal features like daytime, etc. So maybe some community on top of, based on some data from the daytimes could be leveraged there. But that's the beauty of having autonomous things, is you are not in control of what will be called. So for this particular demo, I cannot answer. But for like generally, if you talk generally, providing the tools to the GraphRAG system and let it make a decision on that.
Yeah, definitely. And as Robert said, like in the comments, yeah, he said, I think if time is important, we could add it to the ontology. So yeah, again, it circles back to how you model the data, because you need to ask these kind of questions. I mean, it's not easy to cover all kinds of questions that anyone, like, that pops to your mind. Like, basically, if it's a business use case, you probably have a set of questions that you kind of expect your users to ask. And yeah, I don't know. It's definitely not an easy one.
Yeah, this is a good point from Robert. So, for example, having a geolocation data also, and then you maybe can model the whole graph based on how things are a distance apart from each other, and then everything is built into the graph. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I would say thank you, Ante. I think we can wrap up. There were a lot of questions, a lot of good questions. Thank you, everyone, for asking them, for joining. If you will have more, join our Discord. We have a Discord community that is quite vibrant. You can ask questions there. Ante is also there every day, so no worries. You can ask him anything you like. I shared the presentation here and the code here, but I will also we will also probably send this as a follow-up. And okay, let's do one more. I see there's one more, so we don't miss it. How deterministic are the answers that the Agentic GraphRAG will give you? Are they quite consistent, given a certain degree of variability in the input prompts? Okay, this is the last one, I promise.
Yeah. So they're not deterministic, because if you change just the one word in your question, it can be different. For example, it can be a difference between what can you like? How many important nodes are there, or what are the 10 most important nodes? So essentially, you immediately change the problem there, and then the LLM will react completely differently. And not just that, so as the LLM is not deterministic, you cannot say that even asking the same question will be deterministic. So yeah, if you ask similar questions, you will get similar, let's say, semi-deterministic answers and tools used. But yeah, if you change anything, it can widely be different.
Yeah, it's not easy to be always sure what will actually happen in the end, but having a lot of these tools and feedback loops and stuff, you can kind of have more control over that process. As Ante said, we have a lot of events coming up during February. We have 3 more now in February. Please check our website. You have all the information there. Register for the next community call with Redfield. And I guess I'll see you there very soon. Thank you, Ante, once again for doing this presentation. It was awesome. Thank you for answering all of the questions to our community. And that's it. Thank you everyone for joining, and see you really soon on the next Memgraph community call.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.